Hello, listeners of the Mad Scientist podcast. I'm your host, Chris Cogswell, here today only with the memory of Marie Mayhew, because I forgot to tell her about this interview, and so she's probably still at work. So, doing really well. I am joined today by two great guests. I am joined by Olivia and Dylan. Olivia is a listener who actually emailed the show in and offered to come on and give us an interview about witchcraft and her practice of it. And so, Olivia, thank you so much for coming on the show.
For sure.
And so Olivia is born and raised in Colorado, currently in LA. She is a fitness instructor and artist and has been practicing witchcraft for 6 years now. So here we also have Dylan, who is really steeped in and practiced in a whole bunch of different esoteric, I guess, witchcraft, Wiccan, Santeria, all kinds of different things. Dylan has a degree, a bachelor's in anthropology with a focus on occultism and mysticism. And you have been practicing for about 10 years now, since you were 9 years old.
Correct.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on the air, first off.
Yeah, for sure. We're excited.
Yeah, I know it's not, it's funny when this is sort of when you talk about kind of your, like in modern society, kind of people's personal belief or faiths are kind of, almost a taboo subject, right? We don't really talk about them unless we're in a place, unless we're, really drunk and you're, you're raring for a fight at the bar, or you're, you're in company with people who are really comfortable. So I do really want to thank you for, being open enough and comfortable enough to come on and talk to us today. So, So anyways, to start things off here, I just kind of wanted to know for both of you, how did you start practicing, if you want to get into that? And then, what sort of made you decide to become practiced in these sort of, traditions?
For me, it was, I kind of like, I always tell people, I feel very fortunate because both my parents were very liberal with spirituality and beliefs. My mother, she's Cherokee Irish, and then Black Irish, which I guess are the Apaches, who are like, we're not gonna side with the white man, and I don't know. So like we had that. My dad is Cuban, and then he's also German and a German Jew. So we just had different beliefs. So like growing up, it was never religion was never like a construct. So as a kid, it really evolved from stories. So my mom and dad, like, they both loved history. My mom would read me books on Greek mythology. And I think just in this world, once I just always had this idea that that magic or mysticism predated the world. And then I was able to find my way. So I found Wicca. Wicca was the first thing that I found early on. And then once I got into that, it was just like, I don't know, like I would meet people.
Opened.
Yeah, the doors opened. And then I would meet these like, Christians and Catholics. And it's like, and in school, there's always that, like, are you Christian or Catholic? And I'd be like, I'm pagan. But the thing too is that I think also my love of history. So my love of history really fueled my love of spirituality, because I think, paganism was the beginning, and it was everything was steeped in mysticism. And to me, it's just like, I don't know, I guess that's how I started. I started with that. And then it was the day-to-day, like there was prayer, but then spell work is really just prayer with activities.
Yes.
I guess. So that just made sense to me. And then I read the New Testament, and it scared me. Because what a vengeful God. I'm like, damn. So yeah.
That's my man.
Interesting.
Like,
okay.
Yeah.
So it's sort of okay. Yeah. So Olivia, how about for you then? Actually, I want to hear this.
So I think it was always something that was like deep rooted in me. I just always had this really strange fascination with any kind of like ritual work that any like ancient civilizations had. I loved anything that was kind of just like mysterious, and there weren't a lot of answers. And being raised in a Christian home, it was always like tarot cards are the devil. Anything that's not Christian is the devil. And it was just like, okay, I can't touch anything. And you hear all these horror stories about, like cults and all that stuff. But then I remember like I was a child and we were doing communion for the first time, and they were handing around, like the grape juice and the wafers, and they were like, this is the blood and flesh of Christ and you must consume it. And I'm this like 8-year-old child, like, that's a little culty, kind of freaky. Like everybody else is telling me I should be scared of everything else, but that's kind of freaky. So I was like, maybe I just misunderstand this. And I just kind of started like learning more about it and trying to dig more about it. And it just evolved from there.
Interesting. Okay. So, it's kind of interesting, I think. So Dylan, you kind of came from a more, I would actually say probably closer to my own background as a kid. My family, like we were talking about on the before we started recording, my grandma was very my nona, my mom's mother. We were raised Roman Catholic, but there was always kind of a tinge of the old country, right? Of Croatia
Definitely.
and Yugoslavia and kind of these old beliefs. And one thing that we touch on the show a lot is my grandma had a lot of personal superstitions, but even more than that, almost like personal rituals, right? And so part of that, I think, was probably undiagnosed OCD, but another large part of that, though, was really a sincere belief, I think, for her in the power of kind of natural things to cure you, right? So one thing, my grandma was straight obsessed with lemons. She really thought like a mixture of lemon juice, onion, yogurt, and something else, some kind of spice or herb or something could really, basically like it was what was keeping her alive, and she lived to be like 92. So I guess you can't argue with results.
Yeah. For sure.
But I don't know if I want to start every day eating sour yogurt, but but it is interesting. So my own mom, my mother, some of my earliest memories are hanging out with my mom's friends who they would all get together and read tarot cards together, right? And try to tell each other's futures. Yeah. And, my mom was always, and, my mom is great. She loves books. She loves, she always gave me a lot of leeway in the books that I was allowed to read, right? And kind of the stuff that I was allowed to research and get into. Definitely. And religion and kind of mysticism and stuff was always something that fascinated me. And I think for my whole family, it's sort of, because of our connection to it through our grandma, it's always been kind of an interesting thing. But no one, as far as I know, no one really has ever started practicing. But I know, a couple of master's theses have been written on this sort of subject. And, it's always been an interesting thing for all of us, I think. But actually, so Olivia, you came from it sounds like a relatively strict Christian household.
It started out like that for sure, because I was the first kid they had, and the first kid, they're like, you have to shelter and nothing can hurt you and everything. So it started out like that, and now my parents are pretty like lenient, and like I mentioned, I'm a fitness instructor, but I'm a pole dance fitness instructor. So like that that when I was like, I want to do that, a lot of my family was kind of like, and.
Sure, okay. We've all gotten the disapproving hum.
Right, it's that passive.
Yeah.
But they started to kind of like open up of like, oh, it's not all bad, and they started to understand a lot more of it as I grew into it, which was really nice. So that's lucky on my side, but it was definitely
pole dancing, not witchcraft, right?
Both.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, my mom, I'm still like very nice when I talk about witchcraft with my mom. I'm not like, so I did this spell today and talked to the dead, like I'm not, I didn't do that. But she knows like tarot cards still freaks her out. So I just kind of like, I'm vanilla with her when it comes with that. But, she's more open to it, and it's kind of like, you're an adult, you can do whatever you want. But when I was growing up, it was definitely like sheltered. Be careful of like, I couldn't watch Harry Potter growing up because it was the devil. So
Interesting.
it was a lot of that.
Wow. So actually, yeah. I mean, that is kind of an interesting. It's almost an aspect of, I guess, sort of, protecting you from something that in the end kind of really gave you a source of a lot of comfort, I would imagine.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny, kind of an interesting way how that kind of stuff works out.
Yeah,
For
for
sure.
sure.
And
Yeah.
touching on grandmothers real quick, my grandmother, she was, I mean, she's been through the ringer in her life. She's 82. And she has been, she was Jewish, Catholic, Christian, Buddhist.
Girl.
Yeah. She's
Wow.
done it. Now she's agnostic. But what was funny is that during her, like, she would do her prayers in Buddhism. So she'd have her prayer beads and she had her whole thing and she'd chant. But then she was also like, I remember my great aunt would come over and like things weren't happening. And I remember she needed to sell a house. So it was like, I'm going to bury a statue of St. Anthony in my
mom
backyard.
did. And then I was like, bitch, that's
And I'm
witchcraft.
like,
I'm sorry, I didn't say that about my
Sorry,
mom.
I'm like, that is witchcraft. And she's like, no. And I'm like,
it's a saint.
and the other thing too was like, if you want to speed something up, so say that something's en route or you want to speed something up, you would get a little statue of St. Anthony and you would flip him over. So you would flip him upside down. And that was supposed to kind of like make sure that things happen quickly. But all these, and it's something that I actually really discovered when I was in New Orleans. It's this folk magic. So it's a combination of modern Catholicism or Catholicism in general, and there are still those pagan roots. And no matter where you go, like those pagan roots have not gone away. They haven't been stripped.
Christmas.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's actually really interesting. Because there's a lot of that with, if you look at the kind of the history of Catholicism, right? A lot of those things like the saints themselves.
The saints are goddesses.
Exactly, right? The saints were kind of a way for, the Romans were kind of, we're not giving up our drinking and eating holidays. And then so the church was like, fine, you can have them, but just we'll make it our own thing. That's okay, right? And so you end up with like St. Anthony's Day or St. Michael's Day or whatever.
Yeah.
And then on top of that too, kind of the continuation of the whole almost underground economy of talismans and trinkets and stuff turning into,
sure.
I mean, I think like every good Italian family, we had a Saint, was it Saint Christopher and a Saint Michael thing in the car and a little Padre Pio sitting there glued to the dashboard. And, it just, it gave you license. You could drive as badly and as vulgar, say as many vulgar things as you wanted, but the saints were there protecting you, right? So.
Oh, totally. And also look at, I mean, there's Saint Bridget, who's she's very popular amongst Irish Catholic.
Sure.
And she's the goddess Bridget, and she was the Celtic goddess of magic, so they were just kind of like, oh, well, we can't kill everyone. So maybe a way to convert people is to be like, your goddess is also a Catholic.
That's super interesting.
Surprise.
Yeah. It's a very interesting kind of, that's one thing that we talk about a lot on the show is how these ideas of kind of magical thinking and these kind of, I don't know about historical pagan roots, but kind of these things that we seem to have almost ingrained in our consciousness as, well, this logically makes sense to us, even if it doesn't follow kind of the causal chain that science has put out for us. There seems to be some kind of rhythm to the way that we think where, okay, well, if this occurs, then this is a likely cause or whatever. And so a lot of these ideas stick around over time, and that's really where we get a lot of our supernatural mythology, right?
Oh,
Very
for sure.
super interesting. I mean, so actually, one thing that you guys touched on that I kind of want to get into a little bit more is so Olivia, you are a practicing witch.
Yes.
And Dylan, you are just a mystic in general. You're kind of, doing it on all fronts. But
Yeah.
you've studied all fronts, but what would you consider
Yes.
yourself? Would you consider yourself to be a Wiccan, or what would you consider yourself to be?
No, I would consider myself to be a witch. So I do,
Okay.
and that's another, there's a lot of stigma there. But the root word, I mean, witch means wise one.
Okay.
So it is wisdom, and it defies male or female. Warlock actually means traitor.
So I heard that once at the I heard that at the so okay, full disclosure. Whenever I create a character in any video game, I'm always a warlock class. Okay, full disclosure. In Skyrim, Skyrim you didn't get to pick a class because they dumbed down their specking method, whatever. But anyways, I heard that at the Witch Trial Museum in Salem, Massachusetts.
Yes. Oh my
And
God, I've been there.
yeah, it's great. I mean, me and Katie have been there the whole time we lived in. We feel like we went like once a year practically. We love Salem. It's a great
so
city.
great.
But so that's interesting though. So warlock means traitor.
Yes.
Okay.
And then it's funny because then you have the male witches who are like trying to
I'm
make
a
warlock a
warlock.
thing.
Right.
And I'm like, you're a traitor.
Right. So
So like there's a and I don't want to name names, but there are a few famous male witches out there who are also authors, and they're all about reclaiming the word warlock, but there's nothing to reclaim. And then wizard is straight out of like Le Morte d'Arthur,
Okay.
fantasy. That's
So
about it.
what about words like mage or so magi? I think is a root from sort of more like Hebrew languages, right? So sort of
Yeah.
right. So magi and jinn and all that kind of stuff goes together. But what about the word mage itself? Is that does that have a real meaning today, or is that just kind of a word that people throw out there?
I know in some Wiccan circles, I believe you are a mage before you become initiated.
Okay.
So it's kind of like it's that. And it's weird because also like novice too. Like I'm hearing all these new and that is also part of the neo-paganism culture. So it's this not millennial, but I think
Getting
it's just
hip.
woo. Like someone today was not today, but someone the other day I met and she was like, I'm a Wiccan novice, going into my 3rd degree, and I was like,
What?
what?
Right. Sort of almost a karate belting of religious practice, right? But I actually think in some ways that is almost as well, in Catholicism and Christianity, right? Or at least in Catholicism, I can't really speak for all sects of Christianity, but in Catholicism there is almost a first you get reconciliation, and then you get communion, and then you do confirmation, and then you get married, and then right, like there's almost this rhythm
sure.
of you kind of, as you get higher level, I guess you get better and better titles, right? And you become
Yeah.
more initiated into the church. So that's going to get to another question later, but is there anything formal like that in these religions?
Well, for Wicca specifically, or at least when I did my Wicca initiations, there was a hierarchy, but it was like high priest, high priestess, and then everyone else was just part of the coven.
Okay.
In order to be part of a coven, so you would be like on the sides. So there's the inner circle and the outer circle. You would be like an adept, or I guess a novice. And you had to be with the coven studying for a year and a day in order to be initiated. So usually most traditional Wicca covens, it is a year and a day to be initiated into a coven, or to even to some people to call yourself a Wiccan.
And so what does that mean, both in terms of like study, like what are you studying, and then also what is the initiatory, is there like a knowledge test you have to pass, or even a ritual or something, or okay.
Well, for me, the thing too, so here is there are different forms of, because so Wicca not to give you like a, but Wicca started in the 60s.
Sure.
So it is also considered a neo-pagan religion. So if someone says that Wicca is like 6,000 years old, they're blowing smoke up your tushy.
Sure.
Um, Wicca started in the 60s, or maybe the early 50s with Gerald Gardner, and he had his coven. And within that, there were different people, and they broke off and started their own forms of Wicca. So there's Alexandrian Wicca, there's Gardnerian Wicca, there's Dianic Wicca. There are many forms of Wicca. So I was part of a Gardnerian Wiccan coven and an Alexandrian Wiccan coven, Gardnerian stemming from Gerald Gardner, who started Wicca. And every initiation process was different. So really what you learn is you would learn the lunar cycles, when to cast spells. A lot of it is meditation and getting comfortable with the practice. I do love that they teach you kind of like a history of witchcraft. You're getting familiar with the idea, with the deities, so the spirits. You learn a lot about crystals and stones. And it's really up to each circle to tell you. So it's not like what you learn in one coven, you're going to learn in another, because some are fast-paced, some are slow-paced, some you are one of 6 people trying to be initiated, and you may be the one person, so you get more hands-on. A lot of it, too, is at your own leisure, and making sure that you do the work yourself and just attending the group rituals.
Okay.
So I really do. I needed that structure to start, and I do think that it was very necessary. But unfortunately, or like once my eyes were open, or I did more research or whatnot, it's not, that is not all of witchcraft.
Sure. Well, actually, so that brings us to kind of probably a question I should have asked beforehand, which is, so there, because witchcraft and Wicca, as you pointed out, they are different, right? Wicca is sort of a more formal practice that started in the 60s, whereas witchcraft is sort of a longer, a tradition that goes back to, pre-recorded history in some ways, right? So
yeah, it's a Neolithic times.
Yeah. So do you want to speak to kind of the difference between the two, and what is that difference ultimately? What kind of, if you were to boil it down to one thing, what would it be, if you can?
Sure. So I would say witchcraft is a practice that dates back to, like you said, the dawn of time. And witchcraft is a practice, and Wicca is it's a neo-pagan religion that started in the 60s. It's a closed religion too. So not anyone can just call themselves a Wiccan, despite what you may find at Barnes & Noble. And
deep cut. Oof.
What?
Oh, and you're going hard. I'm gonna start getting hate mail.
Sorry.
No, I'm just kidding.
Sorry.
I'm just kidding. It's fine. I get enough hate mail on my own. You're good.
You're gonna have some hardcore solitary practitioners going after you. But like, there are self-initiated Wiccans. I love them. They're they buy a book at Barnes & Noble, they read it, and then all of a sudden they're Wiccan. But Wicca is a closed religion. But anywho, I mean, that's really is the difference. The other thing too with witchcraft is not a religion. So that is why, like, throwing it to Olivia, that's why Olivia can be a Christian witch.
Sure.
Because witchcraft is a practice that is pretty eclectic, and you find
it's like cooking.
And you find it in every religion. Even if you don't want to call it witchcraft, if you want to call it magic or folk magic or superstitions or totems or whatever the case may be, that is all witchcraft.
Okay. Anything with intent, yeah.
Okay, so witchcraft is sort of okay, correct me if I'm wrong too, and then Olivia, I want to hear more about specifically the Christian witchcraft angle, kind of, right? But so as far as I can understand it, then, so Wicca is a set of practices and a system that you actually have to be initiated into, right?
Right.
Whereas witchcraft is almost, I don't know if it's a skill set is the right word, but almost witchcraft is sort of a method of acting and doing things that you sort of try to through ritual put your intent on the physical world. Is that right? Or the
Yeah.
spiritual world?
Precisely.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it is a way of life too. So, but I think with Wicca has more structure. Usually, not usually, Wicca also involves there's a male and a female deity or aspect of God. And Wicca does have a belief in God. So there are daily practices and there's something called the Wiccan Rede, which is something, it's almost like the 10 Commandments for the Wiccan that you abide by. So when you are calling yourself a Wiccan, what you are saying is that you believe in a male and female aspect of God. And not all Wiccans are witches. That's where it gets tricky. Yeah. So not all Wiccans are witches and not all witches are Wiccan. It's because, like I said, Wiccan is a spirituality. It's a spiritual faith and religion that actually got recognized, I believe, in the 70s, if not earlier. So it's a recognized religion, and witchcraft is just one of the many constructs that fall within Wicca. Whereas witchcraft by itself does not have to. It's just a practice in daily life.
Okay.
So whereas in Wicca you would have to abide by the holidays and maybe do spell work for the holidays, like Halloween or Yule, which have their own Samhain. Where you would have days that you would have to do spell work, you can be a witch and never cast a spell, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean,
I'm sure I hooked you up.
the way I'm kind of looking at it is like, just because you own a basketball doesn't mean you're an NBA player.
Precisely.
Right? Like you can
Yeah.
do that stuff and kind of have fun with it and whatever, and it can even shape a lot about the way that you do your life, and you can take it very seriously. But unless you buy into this larger thing, and that larger thing accepts you as well, then you're not, whatever. Just because Anyways, that's a terrible analogy, kind of. But so okay, so Olivia, so you consider yourself to be a Christian witch?
Yes.
So,
Yeah, I know. A lot of people. I know I can't see your face, but I can see your face right now.
Well, so it's interesting because so we always joke. Okay, and maybe you guys can actually help settle a discussion here for us. We always joke that Katie's mom is very big into herbs and herbal remedies and stuff. It's like a huge thing that she's into, right? And she's also very into kind of the history of herbs and sort of what role they played in witchcraft and stuff, right?
Right.
And so I always joke with Katie that her mom is an alchemist, right? In some ways. So is kind of, so that's a secondary question. Is herbal remedies, is that kind of view that we always have of healing women or wise women in local communities being part of the witchcraft tradition, is that a valid view? But anyways, Christian witches, I want to know about it. How does that work for you?
So it's just weird because it's very like you kind of get heat from both sides of like the witches and the Christians if they're like you can't be both, but you can. So the way I see it is that again, witchcraft is just doing things with intent. It's kind of like when you clean up, when you're doing spring cleaning, you're cleansing your house and getting rid of all the stale energy and like the things that you don't need, and you feel lighter, like that heaviness or the staleness is gone. And like I consider that a ritual, or I consider that as like witchcraft. And prayer is intention. So if you're saying, I'm going to pray for you since you're going to surgery or etc., or I'll light a candle for you, it's essentially the same thing. You're still doing both with the intention of calling upon a higher power in order to kind of like reach in within your life and kind of help you out and gain control of things. And like rituals is communion. My favorite is when people are like, well, there's not possession in Christianity, and you're like, well, it happens when people speak in tongues,
huge part of it, right? Yeah, I mean,
yeah. And so I think it's just the fact that it was so demonized throughout history, oddly enough, of not just, but like mainly women who were midwives, healers, and wise women were accused when they had all of this. It was because they were powerful in a sense that other people didn't understand.
Sure, yeah, it's kind of an economic, socioeconomic question of,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
oh, how did that old lady get so rich?
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
I bet if we throw, you know,
Exactly.
yeah, absolutely, 100%. I totally agree with that view of kind of the history of witchcraft.
Mhm.
So, okay, so then you take, and the thing is too, I think there is a distinction, an important distinction there between Christianity and Catholicism as well, right? Where Catholicism is sort of, in some ways almost, Catholicism is more like the Wiccan and Christianity is more like the witchcraft, right? Because Christianity can in some ways sort of be, you know, you can have any number of denominational sects, right? And it's more about having a personal connection with God, whereas Catholicism is more about, at least in my, you know, how I was raised with it and whatever, it's more of a connection to God, but it's through a church hierarchy, right? It's
Right.
more
Yeah.
formal, a
Exactly.
much more formal thing.
Christianity is definitely like a one-on-one thing.
Right. You know, you can have your own interpretation of the Bible, and you can, you know, you can become a healer potentially, and all this
Yes.
other kind of stuff. Now, so in terms of kind of, I guess I'm really interested in sort of the mechanisms actually of practicing witchcraft. So actually, I think Dylan kind of spoke to this pretty well before, which was there are kind of local leaders in the sense of like individual covens within Wiccan, but then also within witchcraft, since it is kind of a more personal thing, there isn't as many kind of rules placed on it and everything else. But I'm actually wondering when you perform a, so do you actually consider that you actually cast spells or do ceremonies for specific?
Oh
Maybe
yeah,
not
totally.
I do. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So can you run us through that? I guess kind of what would that entail?
Um, it's so free moving that it's kind like you don't really have a set like rules or guidelines of like first you do this, first you do that. It's all kind of like to each their own. But honestly, like a lot of the time it's me, like, I mean, I guess something I do daily is I wake up and I, you know, get some tea and then I kind of like, I do morning stretches so that I can warm up for my dances and stuff. But I try to kind of like meditate a little bit just to kind of like get myself gathered for the day. And I set up my crystals and I make my tea and I just like meditate. And I would consider that a ritual. Or if I feel like I can like light a candle and kind of pray for somebody if I need to. But I mean, I feel like that's pretty much a morning ritual in my sense. And I think the biggest misconception is that like a lot of people feel like it's this dark room and you're lighting like 800 candles and you're like chanting this thing with like 8 books around you and like this giant cauldron, when really I'm just like, all right, I'm gonna light this candle and like sit for like 15 minutes in silence.
Right.
It's true. When I first started the craft, it was, and not the craft the movie, but when I
Which
first started,
Very good movie. 10 out of
oh,
10.
it's a great movie.
10 out of 10 Mad Scientist rating right now.
Yes, it's a great movie. And you know what's funny is that they actually do. I
Real-
appreciate their views on witchcraft.
They do real spells in it.
They do real
Yeah.
spells. But that's another story. But for me, like in the beginning when I first started, I was very by the book. So what I saw my coven do, I felt like I had to incorporate into my daily life. So I would have those 10 candles in the dark room and doing all those things. But then as I got older and as I got out of Wicca and I guess found hoodoo, which is folk magic, it just became so liberating. So like now it's like, you know, I don't have to, like, there's a book out that everyone's going crazy for. I see a lot of millennials buy called Moon Spells.
Oh,
And it's like literally, it's a great book and they have great stuff, but it's like you have to wait for the 4th week till
yeah.
your house is in Pisces to like the full moon when it's blue. And it's like, ain't nobody got time for that,
Sure.
you know? So I'm lucky if I remember when the full moon is. It's tomorrow, by the way.
Yes.
And you know, it's as simple as lighting a candle. For me, my ritual is similar to Olivia. I wake up and like to me, it's like showers. I'm cleansing myself.
Yes.
I'm cleansing myself. I'm removing myself. I have like this awesome rosemary bath wash. Rosemary is associated with protection. So all that is that, like, to me, that is magic. Like, that is there. When I drink tea, depending on what I drink, every herb has an association.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like incorporated. I know that, like, right now I have tiger's eye in my right pocket. That's helping me with communication. So, I mean, I do my little rituals, but it's not what people think.
Mhm.
You know, it's as simple as, like you said earlier, these talismans or these things of luck that are instilled in us. And it's not the, ceremonial magic where you have to cast a circle and take a good hour. I mean, I can't tell you, one of the reasons why I left Wicca in the first place was how demanding it was. And I was living in New York in the time, and to like jump on the E train and go all the way downtown to meet with my coven members to cast a circle that only lasted 10 minutes and then just talk shit. I was like, after, I'd be like, damn, I can do this on my own.
Right. So I do find that really interesting though. So this is the way that I've always kind of viewed these things too, right? Because I mean, again, so for my own kind of personal biases and whatever, I'm a very kind of scientifically minded person, right? But I am open to, all kinds of different things, right? So, and definitely not one to, I don't know, discount someone else's personal subjective experience, right?
Right.
But so the way I've always kind of viewed these talismans, or even say the ritual itself, just the whole ritual of any kind of religious experience, not just Wiccan or, the personal kind of stuff that you guys are doing, but sort of the way I always view these things, like, an herb or a crystal or a candle lighting or whatever, all of this, to me, they're almost ways to get your mind in the right place to make this stuff happen, right? So like, almost like, kind of like what you were saying just now, Dylan, where, it's giving you confidence, right? It's putting
Precise.
it's putting you in the right state of mind to think, I really want to feel, I really need to, I don't know, I really need to wish good things for this person today, right? And so you surround yourself with good things, or you surround yourself with things that remind you of good things, and in so doing, kind of help yourself get into that mindset about thinking about good vibes to someone else.
Yes.
And that's something that's something I do a lot too, where I mean, I'm not a religious person. I have no particular religious belief really, but if someone says oh, we're going through a rough patch, I will, I'm thinking good thoughts for you. I'm thinking about you today.
For sure.
Yeah.
It's a power of intent and manifestation, and sometimes tools help that. I mean, let me tell you, the biggest, like, to me, like, this, like, what? When The Secret came out, okay? I remember when The Secret came out, and I was like, I read it, and I was like, what secret? We have been doing this. I mean, vision boards, I mean,
They're not new.
They're not new. Have you not opened up Teen Vogue?
Right, sure.
Like,
it's actually an interesting thing, right? We had probably one of my earliest listeners is someone who very much so, I think, found a lot of guidance initially in kind of some of the stuff around The Secret, and then kind of found her way to other sorts of I guess witchcraft, right, would be the word for it.
Yeah,
for sure. And that's what The Secret is. I mean, manifestation
with the power of intent.
The power,
right.
Manifestation with the power of intent. We've been practicing that since. I mean, look at the first temples. That's what it was.
Sure. Yeah. So
and oh, not to interrupt you.
No, go
but
ahead.
To go off of that, going back, I think one side note too is that so gods, like deities, to me, I think the reason why there were so many different gods is, one, they didn't actually believe that these gods existed, but they were more tangible. Like I said, how the Old Testament scared the crap out of me, because you could not have a relationship with that God. He was far away. But with Zeus and Apollo and all these other deities, they had human error and flaws. You could relate to them. But the thing too about manifestation as intent, if you wanted money, there was Fortuna, who was the goddess of money. So you would manifest on Fortuna to bring you money. So really, it's just like archetypes or symbols.
Sure, sure. Yeah, no, the idea of archetypes, I think, is definitely a very very powerful one, right? It shows up all the time, right? And just quick to give a shout out to that listener, that's Tanner out there. So Tanner, thank you so much for being one of my first listeners, doing a great job.
Hey,
Hey, Tanner.
So okay, so actually that's a question though that I actually did have from an earlier thing that you had said, which is about these deities, right? So Wiccan and witchcraft, two different things. Does one have deities versus one not having them? Is there because it kind of struck me as interesting when you mentioned that Wiccan has sort of a dual godhead, I guess, where
Yes.
there's a male and female aspect. Now, is that one being? Is it two beings? Like, how does that?
It's both. It's both. The whole in the Wicca, the way that the holidays are constructed, or the wheel of the year is around the god goddess myth. And depending on different covens, it's different goddesses, gods and goddess. So usually it is a mother goddess, and I'm just using an example of a mother goddess and a god of the hunt. The god of the hunt gets slain, goes into the underworld, and then in spring comes back out. And then sometimes it switches. Sometimes it is the god who's the god of earth, and it is the mother goddess who goes into the underworld and comes back out. So there are there's a Hellenistic coven, which is kind of like Greco-Roman.
Okay.
And their god goddess is Hades and Persephone. So Hades is the god of the underworld. Persephone is the goddess of spring, but also the wife of Hades. So during May and fall and spring and all those seasons, you worship the mother goddess, and then she goes into the underworld, and that's when you would associate with the male energy or things of that nature.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a duality there, but also within Wicca, it's not just those two. You can worship many other deities and spirits as well. In witchcraft, you don't have to. So witchcraft, just like religion, doesn't come with the belief in spirits or deities. I know many agnostic witches who don't incorporate any of that at all. I tend to, but it's solely, like I said, for archetypes. So if I were to do a spell, for example, and I wanted, say I wanted to hear about a job, right?
Sure.
For me, I would probably incorporate, or if I want to hear about communication or something like that, I would incorporate Mercury or Hermes because he's a messenger god. So getting my message out there, having some news delivered to me about receiving a callback. But for me, it's like I said, the archetype, the message of the deity that I'm using, and not so much a belief that, Mercury.
Okay, I got that. So how about for you though? So Olivia, as a Christian witch, right?
Yeah.
Do you tend to kind of use religion, like Christian idols or Christian archetypes, kind of in your practice, or is your I suppose religious practice separate from your witchcraft practice, or are they one and the same for you?
Most of the time they're separate, but I do tend to like, especially if I'm doing something for somebody else, just in general for somebody else, and it's not just for me, I'll usually incorporate like a prayer.
Okay.
But most of the time it's separate because it's more of a personal thing of just kind of like working on myself rather than like trying to manifest like all of these things in my life. It's mainly just for me personally.
Right. I understand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Mhm.
Wow. Man, I already feel like I learned like a huge amount of stuff.
Here's this huge information book.
Yeah, no, it's great. Well, actually, that's actually a question I don't have on my list, but I should ask you guys. What do you think are the best books for people who want to learn about this stuff?
Okay.
The Encyclopedia of Witchcraft.
The Encyclopedia
Yeah?
of Witchcraft
Yes.
by Judica Isles.
Mhm.
Okay.
Everything
and
is in there.
she comes from both a practicing witch and an anthropological aspect.
Okay.
And it's just so
It's really well written.
it's really
Yeah.
well written. It's not dense, and she has published other thing like the Encyclopedia of like 10,000 spells and like she does a lot of and it's not like a dense encyclopedia. It really is just kind of a go-to.
Yeah.
So that's kind of one of my favorites. She's well traveled too. So she's been to Egypt. She's been to these places. So she kind of comes from firsthand accounts, which I really like. And then after that, I'm trying to think of like pagan authors that I know who to stay away from.
Tumblr.
But oh my God,
Sure.
do not go on Tumblr to learn about witchcraft.
Or science. Or science, please.
Science.
Yeah. So it's kind of that. When I was a kid, there was this very famous book, and it's still out there. I saw it at Barnes & Noble, and I was like, and it was like over 10 million copies sold. And it's called Teen Witch by
God.
Silver Ravenwolf.
Yeah.
And it's really good for like the basis of, but it's so fluffy.
Okay.
And when I mean fluffy, it's just a lot of it is I would take with a grain of salt. And then any books on Wicca, I would kind of, they're very one-sided. I've known a lot. Anything by.
You got this.
I got this.
Come on.
I got this.
Wasting time here.
Oh no.
Come on.
I guess. See, the thing with Wicca is that when you read a book on the history of witchcraft coming from a Wiccan, they will tell you
use it interchangeably.
They use it interchangeably, and they use it to their own advantage.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So they will tell you that like 10 million witches died during the burning times. And they'll tell you that like Wicca has been around for 10,000 years, and it's like no, And here's the thing too: Wicca is not all witchcraft. It usually only comes from a Celtic Irish derivative.
Right.
So if you are from the Caribbean Isles, or if you are interested in ancient Egypt, Wicca is not necessarily for you. Raymond Buckland, by the way.
Raymond Buckland. Okay.
Anything by Raymond Buckland. He just passed away about 6 months ago, but he was there. He knew Gerald Gardner. He did Wicca, but his books on witchcraft are not from a Wiccan perspective. They are from folk magic. He also talks about Croatian witchcraft.
Ooh.
Yeah. And
Okay.
he talks about Romany as well. So a lot of gypsy folk magic.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, so he does, and if you're interested in ghost hunting, he has a great book on spirit communication. So if you're looking at that, those would be the two things that I recommend.
Very cool. So great. Well, that's really good. I'm gonna have to buy. Sounds like I'll have to buy a bunch of books tonight.
Wish
Yeah.
list. Amazon wish list.
Yeah, seriously. So,
Mhm.
so I just wanted to quickly before, because I've already kept you guys for an hour already, which this has been great. I'm super excited you were able to come on. I'm learning so much tonight.
Yeah.
What would you say is kind of the biggest misconception the public has, and then what is the biggest misconception the public has, your biggest pet peeve specifically, and something that you would want to be able to tell the public about your practice?
Okay.
So let's go, Olivia. You first.
yeah, I'll go first.
Okay.
I think the biggest misconception is that they know everything already. Not like
Sure.
know everything, but I mean like it's just they tell you, especially when they're like, "Oh, I thought you were a Christian," and it's like, "I am," and then they're like, "But you can't do that," and I'm like, "Oh, well, darn." better rethink my life then. Like it's
Right. Well, I'm doing it, so yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
That, and I think the big also misconception is we worship Satan.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them don't even, a lot of
That's
witches
one of
don't even
my
believe in Satan.
that's one of my biggest
Yeah. That it is interchangeable with Wicca, and that I think also the whole thing of like, oh, so you're gonna curse me, or
Mhm.
like it automatically becomes very, very negative when
Yeah.
most of any of the intentions of a witch are usually everything, all positive. So I think that's the biggest thing is like immediately you're a villain.
Yeah,
For sure.
I think as soon as people think that you have access to some power or knowledge that they don't have,
Right.
it just seems to be people's first instinct to wonder if you're going to use that against them.
Yeah,
It's
Right.
it's the fear of unknown.
It's a fear and unknown, and it's
Yeah.
like, and now you would think with Google that because here's the thing, like I remember like reading like in the 90s I could understand.
Mhm.
Like even up until the 90s, like okay, witchcraft is kind of like esoteric. But now it's like those mysteries, like there was a book on wicked mysteries. Those mysteries aren't mysteries anymore.
Right.
It's kind of there.
Mhm.
For me, real quick, so I guess mine, like I have is like one, it would be Satan because the devil is a big thing because to me, one, in order to acknowledge Satan, you have to acknowledge
The horn
God.
of God.
Well, yeah. But
Oh, yeah, you have to
Lucifer,
acknowledge
so
God.
like Lucifer is a Christian Catholic entity.
Right.
So in order to worship him and incorporate him into your practices, you have to acknowledge that side of Christianity. If you are not a Christian, you do not worship the devil, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. It's sort of a yeah, no, it's absolutely it's a definitional problem, right? Satan only exists within Christianity.
Precisely.
Therefore, right, yeah.
So it's that. The other thing too is like Olivia touched on is that Lucifer was supposed to be beautiful. So when there's the imagery or archetype of Lucifer with horns or like a goat or anything like that, that is all pagan symbolism.
Right.
So that is witchcraft. That is a horned god. If you want to call the horned god the devil, go for it. Because a lot of British witches did. They called them the devil because they did. So if you want to call me worshiping the devil, that's fine. Another thing too is, which I guess, I don't know if you're going to bring up later or if I should bring up now, the black magic thing. But before that, I also think it's, I used to be very mad at witchcraft being a fashion trend. And like in the past year, it's blown up. Like it's all
Sure.
over.
We're mainstream now.
We're
How cool is
mainstream.
that?
And at first I was like, oh no. But at the same time, it probably couldn't have been better.
Yeah.
I think the only thing now that I feel like I have to fight with is that I'm a male and I'm a practicing witch. So a lot of people are taking it as, with a lot of feminism rights that are going on, it's reclaiming the idea of being a woman. And I feel pushed out.
Bye,
Sure.
Dylan.
Yeah, I was actually gonna say so yeah, that was kind of the last thing I really want to get into was this idea of kind of white versus black magic. But actually, before we get into that quick, the thing, yeah, it is interesting, right? Because I actually think that was something that it struck me as interesting when you mentioned that there was a kind of a male and female deity almost mixed together, or not necessarily mixed together, but there is kind of both the male and female archetypes, right? And that to me assumes gender roles, right?
Definitely.
That seems to assume, you can't have if you can't have a male archetype god if he's not, I don't know, chopping down trees and grooming his beard and whatever, right? But
it's true, and I'm the first to say that of the faiths, Wicca is pretty like kind of gender neutral.
Okay.
And I like if you look at ancient Rome, ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, I mean the female was worshipped, but at the same time there is that male archetype. He's always there. Sometimes he's lesser, sometimes he's more. But there's only one. There's Dianic Wicca, which is just women, and they worship the goddess Diana, who's the goddess of the moon, and she's a virgin goddess. But aside from that, yeah, and in Wicca there is that male-female role.
Sure. Interesting. And then this actually will lead right into kind of the next, this ending kind of segment, I guess. So you mentioned the idea of sort of Satan as a, Satan as a kind of really having no connection to witchcraft outside of kind of the cultural connections that people have put on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
It is a Christian deity, and really the reading of Satan, what Satan has come to mean in modern times, is significantly different than what Satan meant even at the time of the writing of the Bible, right?
For sure.
So anyways, but that does lead me to another question though of is there no within witchcraft, or maybe let's say Wicca, because witchcraft is more of these practices. Is there no within Wicca ultimate good deity and ultimate evil deity, right? Is there not
There is not.
Okay.
It's just like nature. There's the predator and the prey. There's the balance of dark and light.
Okay.
And one thing to say about black and white witchcraft, and this was on my that's why I was like, I'm gonna hold it back because it's on my pet peeve list. But then I knew prior that you were gonna touch on this.
Yeah.
So to me, and what I have learned, and from what I've read and what I was taught in my anthropology class, and going to New Orleans, black witchcraft and white witchcraft are not a thing. They don't exist. Black witchcraft is racism.
Yep.
They looked at the Afro-Caribbean traditions of hoodoo and folk magic, and because root work, which is what folk magic is, it's guttural, it's dirty. You use what is at your expense. You use chicken feet. You use bones. It's not animal sacrifice. You're using what's left. The Native American traditions as well, they use every part of the animal. But they looked at these, not dirty, but they looked at these intense rituals and the day-to-day grunge, and they deemed that as black magic.
Okay, I understand, yeah.
Yeah, so to me, witchcraft doesn't have a color. If it did, it would be gray. If you were going to manipulate someone's intent, I mean, I think love magic falls into the realm of black magic, because you are manipulating, or you're trying to turn fate.
Yeah,
you're trying to control someone else, right? I mean, that's kind of where I would. That's kind of, for me at least. So I actually had never even, and this is just kind of from not thinking about it enough on my part, I think. I had actually never made the connection between, kind of, what's the first thing you think of when you think of stereotypical kind of black evil magic? It's voodoo, right?
Yes.
That's like the first thing I think a lot of people have.
What it is.
It's so unfortunate because voodoo and hoodoo is all about healing and ancestral worship.
Right, and that's sort of the interesting thing, right? Is it's not really all that different from, kind of I guess Shintoism, or sort of these other ancestor worship practices.
Right, shamanism, Native American spiritualism.
Yeah, right. Now, but though, for my own sort of, I guess, modern view of it or whatever, to me, the distinction was always, and this is actually from The Craft, great movie, white magic is magic done for the good of someone else or the good of everything, whereas an evil or black magic, a dark magic, let's say, is for harm, for personal gain. Is there no distinction made there of, say, you cast some kind of intent out there of, well, I'm going to be rich, I am going to be wealthy, and my, maybe even that is in itself not necessarily a, I don't know if I'm saying it the right way. Almost this idea of virtues versus vices, right? If it's intent for a vice, does that give it a tinge of, I don't know, negativity, or is that by definition a sort of a misuse of this power?
Well, I feel like it's just, like
it's up to the witch.
Right. You can give somebody a tool, and depending on how they use that, like you give somebody a tool, and depending on how they use that, that's how it's going to come out. Like it depends on the person completely. You give somebody power.
Yeah.
And
they'll use it for good or bad. It's like cooking. It's a knife. A knife can be used to chop your herbs, or it can be used to stab someone in the back.
It's anything that's
evil.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely get it. It's it's the same argument used anytime. Again, it's that view of
Guns.
Someone else, right? Yeah, it's that view of someone else having a power over you that you don't have, and then well, what are they doing with that power, right?
Exactly.
Precisely. And to quote The Craft, 'cause we all got to quote The Craft. I got a quote from you.
Gotta get real witchy.
True magic is neither black nor white. It's both because nature is both, loving and cruel all at the same time. The only good or bad is in the heart of the witch. Life keeps a balance on its own.
Sure.
He pulled that up, by the way. He doesn't have that memorized.
Okay. Well, I mean, okay. Well, now I'm looking a little bit less at you, Dylan. I'm sorry that you don't have it memorized. I wish you had.
Putting me under the bus, Olivia.
Seriously. Oh man. Well, listen. Thank you both so much for coming on the air and sharing with us, sharing with me and with the listeners a little bit of your personal beliefs and ideas and stuff. And I'm sure I'll get other questions and feedback and stuff from people who are interested at home. So if I get those, I'll be sure to kind of contact you guys. And thank you again so much for coming on. And any other last things you want to tell people, anything you guys have going on, anything, I don't know, anything you want to say?
I don't know. If you're in Burbank, come to the Mystic Museum.
See us.
And I guess too, it's be open-minded about, I would say anything that you see in movies in regards to witchcraft, take with like a grain of salt.
Sure.
Speaking of salt, get your protection.
And get some salt.
Anything, you're at McDonald's, you pack up on those salt packets. That's what I do. Protect yourself.
Protect yourself.
Great. Okay. Good stuff. Nice. Well, thank you again so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And no problem. Love to have you on again sometime if there's other stuff that comes up.
Yeah, please do.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.